Living in cities is becoming more and more expensive, so it's very important for people to have affordable housing.
We can provide not just the right space to live, but also the places that they're gonna need to interact with others.
The alternative to an inclusive city is a city that is impoverished in many parts of what we regard as special to us.
The way that we design our cities can either bring us closer together or drive us apart. Most cities are facing affordability issues. People are being almost forced to move out from the cities because they don't have the places that they could afford, and then they need to go to the suburbs. On the other hand, the suburbs might be more affordable and might have a little bit more space, but they are really far away from amenities and from work. How do we create the right spaces so that people can socialize, that at the same time are affordable, and that can cater for also the different types of families that exist today?
There's an enormous amount of land that is available in our city to deliver affordable housing. We like to call it lazy land. Sometimes it's the land we all see that is just a bitumen car park, but it might be a single level community centre in an area where the surrounding development is 5 stories. What if we use the space above that centre for older households? What if we used the spare land around our car parks and wrapped those with housing?
We've all seen examples such as this, the big double-sided car park next to great infrastructure. If we want to keep the cars at ground level, building in the airspace above this, we'd conceptualised 4-storey development for affordable housing for local communities. We've seen recently some very good examples of Nightingale, high-quality housing, well designed to be next to public transport that we're hearing in the background. The idea of replicating that in these sorts of locations makes a lot of sense.
Effective use of poorly used land for housing delivers potentially people close to opportunity. It can deliver safer places. If people are living in places and there is activity in places, bad things don't tend to happen to the same degree as well. You know, people take ownership of their streets. You're stitching together neighbourhoods. So instead of this big piece of tarmac, you can introduce quality streets and spaces if you do it well. We also see if the land has a lower value, then the cost of the housing should be lower also, because so much of the cost of delivering a house is the cost of the land at the moment. The drill hall was an old military training facility back in the early 1900s. It was in very poor state of repair and being used internally as a car park. We saw a really interesting opportunity for use of the airspace for affordable housing and the restoration of the ground floor drill hall as a community facility.
We were able to generate accommodation for 82 bedrooms in over 50 apartments, 25% of them designed for people who have disabilities. As we design the corridors, we think of them as streets where people have their front porch or threshold into their apartments. I'm not a number in a unit, but rather I'm a resident of a street on a level in the building with its own character and with this connection with place. This project is in an extraordinary location, giving people access to affordable good food, great public transport in the city that really link people on this side to more than 1 million jobs within 45 minutes. Using the lazy land to do that well is an obvious obligation, I think, rather than choice.
I think that social housing has a great role in improving our cities. When I first moved to Vancouver, I was really surprised about how different social housing was from Mexico. Social housing in Mexico is about building the same housing typology and then replicate it like 1 million times. And everyone has the same small house that is poorly constructed most of the time, unfortunately, with no identity, with no character. It's easier to think about how we develop new lots or new plots that are far away from the city and that are less expensive. But I think that pushing towards this kind of policy where prioritizing people in need in the most wonderful places where they can have access to all services, I think that that's definitely something that we should keep doing.
We had a very interesting project in an inner city area. There was some public housing in the area. And for some of the traders and some of the residents, they said it would be much better if we move this housing somewhere else, please. The assumption is they're lowering the tone of the area. No, they're not. They're actually enriching the area. Many of the people who've come from struggling households have come to contribute more in volunteering and helping Australians in times of need, like the bushfires and COVID recently. It only takes one or two things to happen in our life that don't go well for us to be in that position. Do we want to feel like, therefore, we're on the scrap heap? Or, no, we're all a big family here, we're going to look after each other, and by raising those who are most in need, we raise all of us.
That could be available.
Affordable housing is important. It keeps communities together, but it also builds diversity. It builds innovation. It builds insight.
Inclusiveness for me means affordable. If I look now in the city, for many people it's not possible to buy a house or to even rent a house. So many starters just move out the city, although they really want to live here. If we want to make an inclusive city, we should make much more affordable housing. I think social housing has maybe a negative connotation to it. We call it social housing, but actually it is affordable housing, and it's for many different people. For every development, we have the 40-40-20 rule in Amsterdam, which means 40% social housing, 40% mid-income housing, and 20% market housing, which means that in every project, we at least have a huge amount of affordable housing, which I think is very important to make inclusive cities.
The Heren project is about affordability and about compact housing, and it's much more than only architecture. It's about making a neighborhood for a lot of different people. The Heren project is 4 building blocks. We did 2 blocks with 178 housing units. We designed that for different user groups, for families, city veterans, and for people starting on the housing market. Mixed tenancy is very important because we want to make neighborhoods that are not segregated, where people can all live together, people from all different backgrounds. What we found very important for this block is to design housing for different user groups in the right place. So every apartment is accessible for everybody, even if you're in a wheelchair. Families, for instance, live on the ground floor next to the outside space where the kids can play. The elderly are in a more confined space on the inside of the block, and the starters, who are mostly the fittest, are on the top floors of the block. Affordable housing was very important here, and we did that by making very compact houses. And by doing so, we had to offer collective areas like a washing room and a collective space where people can come together outside of their apartments.
In the Netherlands, approximately 30% of the housing stock is social housing. which means we have people from all different social backgrounds living in one neighborhood. And I think that is really important to make good cities, instead of putting the affordable housing only in the fringes of the city.
Small footprint design has a big role in terms of how we design our cities and well-being. One of the errors that cities have been doing is thinking that by building a bunch of high rises, they are going to accommodate a lot of people without truly understanding what are the needs and then how people want to live. There are great examples across the world of density done right. One of my favorite examples is co-housing. Co-housing is about bringing different families together in a development, but instead of living independently, they share amenities such as the community garden, laundry. They are smaller spaces, but they are trading off those private spaces that otherwise they wouldn't be using for common spaces where they can garden, where they can be together, where they can actually practice the things that they love.
High-rise public housing, sometimes as 20 to 30-story high towers, still dominate Melbourne's skyline. While the post-World War II urban renewal blitz added towers all over Melbourne, especially in some of its most desirable suburbs, they are fenced and gated communities that don't connect their residents with the surrounding area.
I think it's a great opportunity as a post-COVID recovery strategy to develop a smaller environmental footprint, to develop a more cohesive society, to ensure that we don't leave people behind, that we don't get an explosion of homelessness. We have the opportunity to deliver many benefits, not just for the people who will live in the housing, but for the many who will benefit from new jobs, better safety, etc. as well.
I think the COVID pandemic forced many of us to think differently about place and our impact on the natural world around us. While in lockdown, we found ourselves longing for nature. What role will nature and green public spaces play in our cities in the future?